Welcome. I'm delighted to have with me today JoAnn Stonier, who is a fellow at Mastercard. And welcome, JoAnn.
Hi, Ramon, it's nice to be here.
So, JoAnn, let's talk a little bit about data governance, right?
Ah,
So, it's another topic I'm sure near and dear to your heart with your
very much
being
so.
responsible for privacy. And, there's a lot of tools out there that will allow you to catalog data. But really, it's a failing proposition to just catalog everything, right? Especially in an organization as large as Mastercard or any enterprise. It's just a never-ending thing, right? It's like painting the Old Bridge. As soon as you're done, you got to turn around and start painting it again, right? It's just one of those things. How is data governance in this age of AI also having its moment?
So I've been quoted, I think, as saying data governance is really a team sport. So for us, we had data governance well before, data governance and AI governance, I guess, go hand in hand for us. We had data governance for quite a while, right? And you mentioned I was the privacy officer, and I got the data job because of the GDPR, the regulation in Europe,
Hmm.
back in 2018. Partly because it became almost part and parcel of that law that you needed data governance in order to comply with a whole host of regulations that were coming up. And that was just one of the larger ones. And so data governance really became a way of really thinking of how are you using data in your product development, right? How are you really thinking through all of the privacy, security, product development issues? And so we started really our data governance as really a whole host of different gates that you needed to go through for product development and product design. And
Hmm.
we inserted it into our product design process. And so that's how we always started thinking about data governance. Well, then AI came along for us, and this is pre-Gen AI. Let me start there, right?
Yeah.
And we recognized that we needed to up our reviews because of some of the issues of bias in data about the results we were getting. And MasterCard, for the most part, we were using AI for a lot of fraud algorithms, cybersecurity. If you just think about what we do as we process payments, right? And we sit in between the bank and merchants, right? And we have to do things very, very quickly. So there's a lot of algorithmic thinking that
Hmm.
we have long time done, but AI was enabling us to do it faster and better. But we still had a product development and data governance process that really mimicked kind of the initial data governance. With generative AI, though, we had to redesign everything. And to
Hmm.
your point, realistically, we needed to start, we had started pre Gen AI, really thinking through what tools we could add in to our governance practice so that we actually have both tools, right? And we actually use a really good tool, but it's not enough to use the tool alone, right? Because there's a lot of judgment that has to go into what the outcome is, what data you're using, right? How sensitive that data is, and then which path are you on, and have you done this before? So when you're doing something new, right, and the data is highly sensitive, and or the outcome is going to be highly sensitive. So you may wind up not using very sensitive data, but the outcome may be very, very sensitive to an individual, right? So you're accusing somebody of fraud, or you're going to do something that's going to impact somebody's credit score when we partner with a bank,
Hmm.
right? All of those things can be highly sensitive, right? But maybe we're not going to use the data. Maybe we're just going to come up with the algorithm, but we're going to give that to a bank to apply, right? So we had to really think through from a governance perspective all of the different angles and come up with different pathways. And then what does it mean if we've done it before? What does green look like? What does yellow look like? What does orange and red and purple look
Yeah.
like?
Well,
And who has to approve, and what goes into the tools at the same time, right? And so governance actually to be successful, right, really requires an organization to really understand and access it. Because what we have found is that governance actually allows our executives, our senior executives, to understand AI and the risks in a lot of different ways, whether you're in our, our enterprise architecture group, you have one set of risks. If you're a data scientist, you have another set of risks. If you're in the privacy team or the legal team, you have another set of risks. But by discussing it together, everybody begins to learn what those risks are. And that actually begins to make governance a very, very powerful conversation. And so governance is where it's at from that risk management perspective. And so it has turned into one of the most powerful moments of product development for our firm.
That's really really thoughtful, and I love your comments about governance as a team sport, right? Because data management and data quality and data governance kind of go hand in glove, right? They're all different risk spectrums. Who owns the data? What's the privacy of the data? But then if the data is of poor quality, you're also at risk because that's obviously going to drive incorrect outcomes and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to kind of come back to a lens of sort of data observability, which is what Acceldata focuses on, we're starting to see this concept of operational data governance, right? Data governance, as you mentioned, right, for things like GDPR has always been kind of a defensive measure. It's always been sort of, hey, let's not do something that will leave us to be fined or get sued or be out of compliance. And a lot of times the sort of upside was not there relative to how can I use this incredible wealth of information and how I'm protecting privacy and so forth in a thoughtful way to improve marketing where I'm permitted, to be able to improve my sales operations process. So a lot of this is coming together now, and we're seeing data quality being combined with data governance in a more operational way as data is being procured and flowing through data pipelines. And before it ultimately gets delivered, governance policies are being injected and applied so that things are proceeding and making it to its destination, but being fact checked and validated along the way.
And that's super important for security. One of the things that we care about, right?
Yep.
That one of the aspects of AI that I don't know that it's talked about enough in generative AI is all of the issues around security, right? And
Yep.
how AI, while in the main, most firms are putting it to fabulous use, we also have to be aware that there are bad actors who are also putting it to use. And when you have observability, you have a better pathway to understand your processes as well as potential entry points, right, for bad actors to get in. And there have been some studies showing, right, that those entry points, right, and where generative AI can duplicate like legitimate actors, right, there's vulnerabilities. And so the more you understand your data and the more you understand your governance, the better prepared you can be for some of those potential incursions as well. So governance is where it's at for sure, and observability as well.
Those are fantastic points. Let's switch gears a little bit. And I know that you mentioned that you speak, at the United Nations and a lot of large institutions that are trying to get a handle on this AI. The EU Act, right, which was passed about 2 or 3 years ago, is kind of a little bit ahead of the where US is, kind of like where GDPR was kind of the leading edge in Europe,
Sorry. Yeah.
right? And then,
Mhm.
I'm based in California and CCPA is completely modeled on GDPR. How are you seeing US? Are we playing catch up with the Europeans in terms of their governance policies? How do you see that playing out?
So the EUAI Act, you're right. It's been passed, but it's a little bit different in that the GDPR was like was kind of a fiat law in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The EUAI Act is being given to the nation states, but it's a risk based approach, which allows for, which I think is a good thing,
Yeah.
in that it allows for the contextual use of data. Now, granted, it's going to have to be ironed out what's the most risky and the least risky. So that's challenging. But I do think in the main, the US is aligned with that approach as well, right? I think that regulators in the US are still trying to figure out how to regulate it and do it in a way that is also risk-based, but not quite as heavy-handed, because we generally err on the side of innovation rather than try to stop innovation. We want to make sure that we're more of a consumer protection type of approach rather
Hmm.
than trying to say, well, this use is just never any good, right? So there's that balance that I think we try to do. I think we have the NIST standards, right, that I think many firms are using right now. And then we have from the UN, the High Level Advisory Board, they also came out with a report. But it doesn't make it easy for anybody. And I think that what most firms are doing is using all of those guidance. And I think it does make most organizations try to figure out what is the risk to what we are doing. And I think that's helpful because in the United States, for the most part, we take a sectoral approach to what we all do. So in financial services, we're highly regulated, and we should be, right? People care about their money very much. I think we're also regulated in health, and I think AI and generative AI is being used in healthcare, and I think we will see equal types of care being used for those type of use cases. I think it's harder as you go down, like to generalize manufacturing, but even there, we have consumer product protection laws, and I
Or
think those firms will adhere to those type of standards. So I do think in the United States, it may look like we're behind, but I'm not sure we are, because our sectoral laws against, protecting against harm, I
yeah,
think are going to guide a lot of the behavior of our firms. And then plus, many of our firms are global companies. So what I think we'll do is take all of the laws and then say, okay, the first do no harm. And I think we all like our customers, right?
yep.
We all want our regulators to trust us. We want our employees to be proud to work for us. So in the main, I think you will see us operate in a way that engenders trust of our customers and our regulators. Operates Mastercard always usually goes to the highest standard
Hmm.
required, and then comes up with an approach that satisfies that highest standard, even if it's not applicable in a given jurisdiction. I think you will start seeing that. But this risk based approach is probably not a bad way to go,
Yep.
given that nobody wants to put a risky product out in the marketplace,
Absolutely.
especially one that might cause unintended harm. And given the nature of generative AI that it learns, why would you want to teach it something that's only going to eventually be a bad product, right? So I think that in the main, that is how most companies are designing. But more to come, and happy to direct you to some of my folks who are really doing a lot of heavy lifting in this space.
So taking sort of one step down, you do a lot of work in AI and data policy, right?
Mhm.
And describe how some of that work translates, whether it's from Mastercard or consulting with large organizations like the UN. How is that approach sort of helping?
So, in the main, the policy work I do has a very practical edge. So, I work with the Data and Trust Alliance, and the work that I do with that organization, it's a consortium of companies that have come together to publish best practices around policies and regulations that sort of say, so here is a law. So, take in New York City, there was a law around using AI for HR activities.
Hmm.
And what we did is we published a kind of practical guidance on how we comply with it and how we actually use AI, recommendations for how to use AI for like job applications and making sure that you are giving applicants a fair shot. So it's more on the practical side because I've been a chief data officer and a privacy officer, trying to help regulators and policymakers understand the practical applications. I've just been working with the World Economic Forum on the concept of data equity,
Hmm.
meaning what is data equity? We all kind of know it when we see it, but how is it defined? And then how do organizations apply it to all the different use cases that they might have, given that every piece of data, every use case is very contextual. And so we've tried to make everybody understand that data equity requires a series of actions, a corrective actions, right? Depending upon your data set, because every data set is different, back to our data quality conversation, right? That depending upon the quality of your data and what you're trying to solve, right? Okay, you may need to change the data you're collecting or have obtained. you may have to change your models. You may have to change the way you've actually created some things. And you really need to look at those outcomes to make sure you're thinking not only of individuals, but also the communities in which they live and operate or work, depending upon what you're impacting. And so we've come up with a model framework that really talks about the data, the people, and the purpose, and different attributes that organizations should be thinking about. So I do work like that. That's a little bit more pragmatic. And then, yes, I also work with different firms like the Cantellis Group, where I do work with different organizations to help guide them in their thinking about how can you pragmatically be thinking about how policies should impact your day-to-day practices as you're evolving your data and AI programs in your firms.
I think this is a critical aspect of for chief data officers to get familiar with in a hurry, because many of the chief data officers are also now becoming chief data AI officers to some degree, right? And so
Yes.
as if your compatriots didn't have enough on their plate, right? Now they have to think about regulatory requirements and responsible AI and those types of things. I know many of our listeners who are tuning in today are probably from financial services. Do you have any specific sort of advice or guidance for those organizations that are focused on financial services in this regard?
So it's so interesting. I just finished. I taught a class. I teach a class at Carnegie Mellon in what was their Chief Data Officer program, and they've launched a program, Chief Data and AI Officer program. And
Yeah.
yes, you're right. Everybody's duties are expanding. And so what I say to everybody is this: understand that everybody is learning at the same time, right? But they are looking at you to lead in the learning. And so, for my financial services colleagues, I will say this: financial services firms have always liked return on investment as one of their key metrics. But
Mhm.
this is a time for creativity, because everybody is looking for that innovation moment. And you also need to figure out with your CFO and your CEO, what is your strategy for generative AI? What is it that you're hoping to achieve? What is your differentiator as it relates to your business strategy? And then what is the data that you need to back that up? And then what is your AI strategy? It is a kind of three-legged stool that you do need to look at together so that you can find the ways to innovate to get there. But you can't, AI is a tool, just like data is the food for that, right?
Yeah.
In order to then execute against your company's strategy. And in financial services, I think we're at a pivotal moment of lots of different financial products being made much more tailored to the different kinds of consumers for different types of financial firms, whether that's in insurance or brokerage or banking. And so now's the time to really get close to your customers to find out what is it that they want, because we have the ability to create very customized products for financial services customers, whether they're consumers or businesses or small businesses. Now is a time to create that kind of personalized service and personalized product. And AI can allow us to use information about our customers in ways that we couldn't really access before. Much like in medicine and healthcare, we can create that kind of customized medicine. So I hope
Yeah.
that helps.
No, that helps a lot. So, data observability is actually one of the most rapidly adopted technologies in financial services for exactly the reasons that you described, right? The data being used for these personalizations has to be 100% accurate, because putting out a incorrect offer or something to somebody who has a poor credit rating would expose you to risk, right, and liabilities. And so I think data observability is really being very widely adopted. At least that's what we're seeing by many of the large financial institutions. Not to say that other regulatory companies in environments like healthcare, as you just described, aren't following along. The financial services definitely is leading the charge. So we're close to the end here in terms of our time, but I'm sure our listeners would love to know what's on your bookshelf or podcast or so forth. What do you listen to? What do you do to kind of gain even more insight out there?
So I tell everybody to run toward the change and read everything they can get their hands on. I like Kara Swisher's podcast because she brings in lots of different technologists, and she kind of grew up with all the tech bros, and she oftentimes brings them in and kind of combines that with politics and regulators. So I always find her interesting, and she understands privacy, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then I'm currently reading a book by Timothy Snyder on freedom, is the name of it, and
Mm.
it kind of gives a whole kind of interesting worldview. So I share those two. But there's quite a few really great books on AI. There's one called Artificial Integrity
Mm.
that I'm currently reading, so I offer that one up. But I've just barely cracked the spine on that one. But I think everybody in this field, everybody needs to understand that it's a real interesting moment to be a data professional and an AI professional, and enjoy the opportunity that it presents because it doesn't come along often. So somebody recently said to me that it's like 1998 for the internet, and
Yeah,
so
it
which
is.
means we're at the very beginning, and
Yeah,
so lots of change yet to come.
for sure. I want to thank you, JoAnn, not just for coming on, but also for all your work with the World Economic Forum, the United Nations. You've really taken your Mastercard Fellow Charter, and you're doing incredible good for all of us. And it's very appreciative in the work that you do. And thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Me too.